Well, good afternoon, YouTube. This is Chuck, and it's Thursday, June 15th, early afternoon. Nice warm day, about 80 or so. You can tell today's trash day because the neighbors across the street have their trash can out, and the trash man came and they haven't picked it up yet. So that's going to be the background for today. Sorry about that. But I haven't talked to you in a couple days. I've been having a hard time, for some reason or other, staying focused. My mind's just been off in 20 different directions all at the same time. But as part of that, I got to think about what I wanted to make a video about, and I had several different ones kicking around in my head, but this one today kind of rose to the surface. Now, my most popular video since I started the channel, and I started the channel, by the way, it'd be 8 months ago today, but my most popular video has been one about ancient people and where I visited a place called Way Cool. And I'm going to do some more of those after I get back on my feet again and can get back to doing a little hiking. But for right now, of course, as you know, I'm still recuperating from surgery. Been 3 weeks yesterday, by the way. So I'm going to have to wait a little bit before I can get back out and do this. But thinking about that, my mind kind of got to drifting as it always does. And got to thinking about my friend Doug. Well, Doug was worked as a Reserve Firefighter for me for quite a number of years, and he was a little older than me. But he had a pretty interesting background, and you might find his story interesting. And as a flip side, he had an airplane, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But in order to get there, I need to talk a little about his background. Doug was a retired firefighter for the Los Angeles City Fire Department, and he was there for 23 years. And he did quite a number of things while he was there. And, of course, that's a big fire department. So there's, if you want to do something special, if you get bored with what you're doing and you want to do something different, it's a big enough organization. There's always a place you can do that. And Doug kind of took advantage of that over the years he was there. And besides spending a few years working on an engine and a ladder truck, then after a while, he got onto a one-man mountain patrol unit. And one of the stories he used to like to tell is in his patrol area, there was a place called the Spawn Ranch. And he actually went in there and issued a couple of brush burning permits a couple times to a guy named Charlie. And Charlie turned out to be Charles Manson and the Manson family. And, of course, that was before the Tate LaBianca murders. And so that was within his patrol area. But after he got tired of doing that, he was interested in photography, and so the word came down they were looking for a department photographer, so he put in for that and got that. And he spent a couple of years doing that and running all over the city anytime something major happened. And, every time there was a big fire or a plane crash or a train wreck or any big major incident, he had to go there and photograph it, sometimes by himself. So anyway, he got tired of doing that, and so he wanted to get back up in the mountains, and so he applied to be a driver on a lowboy hauling a fire department dozer around. He did that for 5 years. So the last few years of before he retired, he ended up being the driver for a battalion chief, and so he finished out his last 4 years doing that back downtown again. Very, very wide range of experiences, and when he moved over here, he came in one day and started talking to us, and he ended up becoming a Reserve Firefighter for us. He also, by the way, I'm coming to you from the van, so it looks like the FedEx truck just went by. So anyway, required absolutely zero training. He had more training than most of our people did, and he was very, very laid back, easygoing guy, and just knew what to do. So we hired him in to work shifts when one of our people couldn't do it, and he was with us for quite a while. But the story I want to tell you today is, he was also a pilot, and he had an airplane. After he lived here for a little bit, he bought partial ownership of a Cessna Cardinal 177 RG. Well, those of you that might know about airplanes know that RG stood for retractable gear. And the other claim to fame that it was a little high-wing single-engine airplane, And the other claim to fame it had was that the 177 didn't have a wing strut. It had the wings were strong enough where they were fastened to the fuselage that it didn't have to have a wing strut. So with the high wing and no wing strut, it was a perfect airplane to be able to see out of. There was nothing in the way and take pictures and stuff. It was a very nice little airplane. The fact that it was a retractable landing gear made them a little unpopular because there wasn't as much carrying capacity and they were kind of expensive. And they're pretty rare, actually. Anyway, that was the plane Doug had. And every once in a while, as I mentioned in my community post this morning, he liked to go look at Indian ruins and stuff, or what we called Indian ruins then, and ruins of native people. And I knew where a lot of that stuff was, so every once in a while he'd give me a call. And a nice clear morning when the weather was nice, and he'd say, hey, you want to go fly and look at ruins? And I'd say, well, sure. So we'd take off and we'd go flying around the area, and I knew where there's quite a bit of stuff, and so we'd go take a look at it. So my story today, I want to tell you about a couple of those trips. And out west of here, there's an area where the East Verde River runs through a canyon, and there's cliff dwellings. Well, we went over there, and it was a nice, calm morning, and Doug was a really careful pilot, very safe pilot. And so he wanted to see these cliff dwellings, and so we flew over the top of it a couple of times just to make sure there weren't any squirrely winds we weren't aware of. And then we dropped right down into the canyon, and there was big open areas on either side of this canyon, so there was no concern about getting bottled up in there with a plane. And so we ended up flying there, and we were flying right at the level of the cliff dwellings, and so Doug had me take the controls so that he could look and take a looky-loo and see what was there, and we flew right down in the canyon at about maybe 60, 70 feet above the river, and flew right through there looking at the cliff dwellings right out the left-hand door of the airplane. Another time, and the one that was even more interesting, is we were over in the Sierra Anchas. And the Sierra Anchas is a mountain range south of Young, Arizona, between Young and Roosevelt Lake. And on the east side of the Sierra Anchas, there's several canyons that run from west to east and dump out into a great big canyon called Cherry Creek. Well, all those canyons have cliff dwellings in them. And I'd actually hiked into one in a place called Pueblo Canyon, and there's a 700-year-old cliff dwelling in there that actually in some places the roof are still intact. And I'd actually been into that ruin, and I told Doug about it, and he wanted to go look at it. So one morning he says, let's go fly over there and see if we can get in there and take a look at it. Well, the canyon that this cliff dwelling was in, Pueblo Canyon, is a little box canyon. It's only about maybe 2.5 miles long. And at the very, very end, it's got like a little Shangri-La with a waterfall and about a 100-foot cliff at the end, and then a mountain to the west of that. Well, there's no way to fly up in there with an airplane and turn it around. So the only thing to do is to try to come in from the upper side and try to drop down into that canyon, and there's plenty of room on the east side once you get out the end of it. Well, this was a very, very quiet morning. The sun was up. So we came around. Once again, we flew it a couple of times to make sure there weren't any squirrely wind drafts that we weren't aware of. And so then Doug gets around and he lines the plane up, and we come in just above the canyon rim on that west side, flying west to east. And he's trying to slow the plane down enough to get it to drop down into the canyon. Now, this is not an aerobatic plane. It's just a regular general aviation plane. And the sun beating into that canyon was creating an updraft, and we could not get that airplane to drop. So we flew through there and came back out into the big basin. And Doug said, I want to try this again. So we swung back and gained altitude and swung back around, got back over top of it again. And that time he dropped his flaps like he was coming in for a landing to try to slow the plane down. And we came in just above the trees at the canyon rim and tried dropping that plane back into the canyon again. And once again, there was so much thermal lift coming out of that canyon, we could not get the plane to drop down in there. Now, that kind of plane, you can't dive in there like you'd think with a fighter plane or something. You just don't do that. It's not safe. The plane doesn't do that. So once again, we flew in there as best as we could, and And but we couldn't get the plane to drop down below the level of the canyon rim. It just wouldn't do it. There was too much thermal lift coming out of that canyon. So Doug says, well, I want to try this one more time. So once again, we flew out in the basin, made a big loop, gained altitude. That time he swung around, he put the landing gear down, he put the flaps down, and anybody that might have been in that area watching would have thought we was absolutely crazy putting the landing gear down like we're coming in for a landing to try to get into this canyon. But that time we managed to drop about maybe 30 foot down below the level of the canyon. The cliff dwelling was about 50 feet below us. So as we got down in there, Doug says, well, it's about as best as we're going to do. So he handed me the controls and told me to stand it up on the left wing as much as I could so that he could look at it. And so I did that, and we flew right down into that canyon. He got a good look at that cliff dwelling, and we leveled back out and came back out the bottom end and decided, well, there's nothing else we can do that's in. Anything else we do is going to be dangerous, so we better not try to do anything more than what we did. So that was our adventure for that day. So then after that, we flew on over to Sedona, landed at the Sedona airport for lunch. And any of you that are pilots know that the Sedona airport is on top of a mesa, and on both the west and the east end of the runway, it drops right off of there. And some of the general aviation pilots, they land at Sedona is like landing on an aircraft carrier because there's no room for error there. If you come in on some squirrely winds, it'll drop you right down on the deck, and you don't want that. We never have any problem. We flew in and out of there 2 or 3 times. Anyway, that's my Doug airplane story. He always told me every time we go do something like that, he'd say, hey, please don't tell my wife. She'd get mad, so I wouldn't. And, well, finally what ended up happening is Doug got a little bit older, and he decided that he physically wasn't able to be a firefighter anymore, and his wife decided she wanted to move up to Spokane, Washington, to be up closer to the daughter. And so they sold their place here, and they moved up north of Spokane, up in Spokane Valley. And they bought a really nice place right on the Little Spokane River. Well, on one of my motorcycle trips, I was up that area, and Doug had always said, if you ever get up this way, stop by and see me. And so sure enough, I was up there, but I didn't know I was going to be. And he'd left me instructions on how to get to his house, and so I followed him, and by golly, I found his house. And so I pulled in there early one afternoon, and they weren't home. His little dog was there, and his little dog knew me from back here, and so he was all glad to see me. And so I parked in his driveway and knocked on the door, and there was nobody home. So I walked around the backside of his house, and I sat on his deck in the shade overlooking the Little Spokane River, a beautiful little spot. And I sat there for about 3 hours, and they never did show up. And so I finally decided, well, they must have gone somewhere I don't know about. And so I got on the motorcycle and left. I never did get to see him, and I never saw him again. Well, Doug and his wife have both passed on since then, so I guess I can tell those stories I wasn't supposed to tell his wife. But anyway, thought you'd enjoy a little firefighter story, and we did other stuff other than fighting fires, and I consider Doug a good friend and very interesting guy, led a very interesting life. And we got to go look at some stuff that I never got to go look at otherwise. Did we take some chances? Yeah, we did, but we lived through it, and we were careful, and we took our measured risks. And some people might say we were a little bit crazy, and I guess maybe we were. But that's my story for today. So like I always tell you, be good to each other, love each other, be good to yourself. It's a beautiful day. I can't imagine I managed to do this. This is the first take on this video. I didn't think I'd do it on one take. And we'll review it and see if I got it. And if I did, then I'll go ahead and get it loaded up this afternoon. It's been a while since I loaded anything. But I'm gradually getting to feel better, and I think it won't be too long. I'll be back among the living again, but I'm still kind of confined to quarters for a little bit. So with that, I'll let you go, and let me get back around here so I can find the button, show you down the street. As I said, beautiful day. Can't wait to get back on the road again and get back out squatching and get back out doing what I do. So right now I'll tell you, peace out.